Happy game day, everybody. Welcome to GameQuest of Volquest.com game day podcast. I am Eric Cain. That guy is Grant Ramey. And today we're going to preview from every single angle Tennessee and Kentucky. It's a big time football game for both parties. And we'll hear a little bit from Josh Heupel. We'll get some bowl predictions, some score predictions, and some keys to victory, all that and more over the next 30 to 40 minutes. First, I just want to kind of start out here, Grant. You know, growing up in East Tennessee and being on this beat and everything, kind of observing Tennessee and Kentucky for so long, kind of what do you think this game means? I think this game is one of those games that often gets forgotten about just because historically Tennessee's had its way with Kentucky. And I understand that from a fan's perspective, but this is one of the oldest, games played in college football. It's a rivalry game considered by many. I call it the Border Bowl. I think it's really important. And since Mark Stoops has been there, it's been a whole lot more competitive. Still, Tennessee's won a lot more than it's lost. Kind of, what do you think this game means to Tennessee and to Tennessee fans?
I think it's something that Tennessee fans probably take for granted a little bit because Tennessee has had so much success in this series. I think you take it for granted until 2020 happens or 2017 or 2011 or whatever those years were where Kentucky kind of snuck up and got Tennessee. So I think it's the oldest series, if I'm not mistaken, like 1893. Did you mention that just now? But like, I think Tennessee's had so much success. There's 26-year winning streak, all that stuff. They hadn't lost in Knoxville between '84 and the COVID season, so there's a long gap there where Kentucky hadn't won in Knoxville. So I think Tennessee fans kind of almost take it for granted until something happens and you realize that once you lose one of those games, you realize how much that series kind of means to you and how much you kind of like. I think Tennessee fans took a lot of joy in that 44-6 last year at Neyland Stadium. I think they took a lot of joy in Lexington a couple of years ago, where Tennessee was probably not the better team on paper, but still found a way to leave Lexington with a 45-42 win. So Mark Stoops has built a pretty good football program at Kentucky, given what Kentucky traditionally is in football, and it has been a little bit more competitive. But I still think it's something that Tennessee fans might take for granted just a little bit.
Yeah, and it feels like every time the game is at Lexington, it's always a night game. It's always a little chilly. I don't think it's going to be that chilly this weekend, but it's going to be a night game. Whereas when it's in Knoxville, I mean, it could be 3:30, not 3:30. It could be 4 o'clock. It could be noon. Yeah, sorry. It could be a night game. But Tennessee's going up there, and it feels like it's always close. There's a stop here. There's a big turnover here. Somebody plays out of their minds. I mean, I know Will Levis was not good in 2022, but I remember prior to the Tennessee game, he was just okay in 2021, had a great game against Tennessee in 2022. And then that's when he kind of started, getting some national recognition. It feels like somebody always plays, out of their body, if you will, and kind of comes and has one of those games that we remember talking about.
Feels like there's always that moment, like the Alante Taylor interception return for a touchdown in 2021, or Jalen Hyatt getting somehow left open again a couple times a year ago at Neyland Stadium, even though he had been going off the last 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it was. It felt like people just refused to guard him for whatever reason down the field. Before that, man, the 2020 game, those pick sixes early in the game that set the tone in that one. It always feels like there's that moment. I think there was a goal line stand in Lexington at some point in the last few trips up there that decided a game for Tennessee. So it feels like it's always a night game, and it feels like there's always that one moment that changes the game that you kind of take away and you remember from those games.
All right, so specifically for this matchup, both teams come in with a 5-2 record, 2-2 in Southeastern Conference play. Context is key. I've said that all week. Kentucky got off to a 5-0 start with wins over Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, and at Vanderbilt. Then had a win over Florida. And the win over Florida was impressive. Ray Davis ran for about 1,700 yards in that game. But since that 5-0 start at Georgia, 51-13, where Devin Leary literally couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat in that first half. I remember specifically that first half because I think Tennessee was off that week, and he was just so inaccurate. The following week, you lost by 2 touchdowns. You lost by 2 touchdowns and a field goal at home to Missouri, and so it kind of come down a little bit. Meanwhile, Tennessee, 2 losses on the road, 2 losses outside of the state of Tennessee. Can you break that trend? Tennessee has lost 4 of its last 5 true road games. A lot of positives from the loss at Alabama, in the first half at least. and Tennessee's just got to find a way to play 4 quarters for both teams. Now it's a very very strong uphill climb to get to Atlanta, but for both teams, if you want to reach, your goal is winning 9-10 games. If you want to have some positive momentum this season, I feel like this is the game that you've got to have. I mean, for Tennessee, in order to get to a 9-3 year, you've got to win two of the. This is assuming Tennessee beats UConn and Vanderbilt. You got to win 2 of the 3 at Kentucky, at Missouri, and Georgia. I think your chances are better on the road at Missouri, at Kentucky, than you do at Georgia at home. I mean, Tennessee can win that game at home, but Georgia's a different class than considering those 2 teams. So my point being, it's a monster game for both teams in order of just continuing the trajectory and continuing to try to get to that win total that you can feel good about, and you don't have to be disappointed about at the season's end.
Yeah, and I think it feels like probably fans of both of these teams probably have similar frustrations trying to figure out what their team is. Like
Yeah.
we sat in the box in Neyland and watched Kentucky struggle with Eastern Kentucky early in the season, and we watched Kentucky absolutely throttle Florida at home not long after Florida hammered Tennessee pretty good in Gainesville. And we saw, Kentucky's up 14-0 after the first quarter against Missouri, and then they get outscored 38-7 the rest of the way in that game. And that's a pretty big swing game for both of those programs as well. And for Tennessee fans, I mean, you could show up and see the Tennessee team that could put 50 on Virginia and score 7 touchdowns in 8 possessions or whatever that stat was, or struggle against Austin Peay, or play really, really well defensively against A&M, or put one of their best first halves together we've seen in a long time at Alabama a week ago, only to see the second half happen the way it did. And I know Tennessee fans are sick with the way that happened, the way you lose that game in Alabama, and what that could have meant if it ended differently. But at the same time, like you're alluding to, Tennessee's got a ton to play for. Tennessee's got 3 games right here where you could go 3-0 and change the trajectory of your season if you could win a couple of huge road games at Kentucky, at Missouri, and take care of business on homecoming against UConn, and then go into that showdown with number 1 Georgia on November 18th at Neyland Stadium. So the path to 8-9 wins is still there, and it's still realistic, but you better be able to bounce back and take care of business and play 60 minutes of good football, consistent football. We haven't seen that a ton from this team, and I don't think Kentucky's put that together themselves.
In order to do that, you have got to play 4 quarters. You can't have one disastrous quarter. At Florida, Brent pulled up these stats and put in his 10 things he thinks he learned on Sunday after the game. Second quarter at Florida, Tennessee was outscored 20-0. Outgained 122 yards to 27 yards. Passing yards 72-3 in favor of Florida. First downs 8-1 in favor of Florida. Total plays 21-11 in favor of Florida. Third quarter at Alabama, outscored 17-0. Outgained 171-47. Passing yards 103-22 in favor of Alabama. First downs 7-1 in favor of Alabama. You can't snowball. You can't have a bad quarter that's going to beat you on the road, and especially as an underdog, like you were at Alabama. You just have to avoid that. Josh Heupel was asking about the bad quarter. What's up with that? How to avoid that earlier in the week? And pretty much he says, hey, this is big boy football, right? Welcome to college football.
Man, welcome to college football, right? You got to be on the right side of it. You got to find a way to make the plays that make the difference, and also understand that this game's not going to be perfect. We see really good players and coaches on the other side of it too. I talked about earlier that I like this team because they invest, they prepare, they play hard. We got to be a little bit sharper. And in the first ball game, I didn't think we reset. In this one, just some unique things happened, and we didn't get going on the right side of it. But we got to cut it clean, and we got to move forward in this one too.
I don't know if you watched the Rocky Top Roundtable earlier this week, Grant, but I think in one little spur to conversation out of my mouth, I said snap and clear. I said eye discipline. And Brent afterwards said, man, if you would have said, I forgot what he said, but if you would have said one other thing, we'd have to stop the whole thing and get you corrected on Butchisms. And I'm like, well, snap and clear, I have always said. And then eye discipline, I mean, I remember him saying, obviously champions of heart and a bunch of other stuff. Was it shower discipline? Was that Dooley? I'm off on a tangent here.
That was Dooley.
Okay.
63 effort was Butch. 6 seconds, 3 great strains.
Gross. It's game day. Listen, I'll talk about all this. But point being, though, I mean, you've got to snap and clear. You have to reset and move on. And sure, Josh Heupel's. I've got the stat pulled up right here. I mean, it's a really incredible stat. He's 7-1, outscoring opponents. Something crazy after losses. Here we go. He is 7-1 at Tennessee coming off a loss. This is Josh Heupel, averaging 51.8 points per game in those 8 games and have an average margin of victory of 38.3 in those 7 wins. So, I mean, goodness gracious, like, you like your chances coming off a loss, but that's good, Grant. But in a game, Heupel said it right there. Things aren't going to be perfect. There are good players. There are good coaches over there. Some coaches around the country are sign stealing. You got to go up against that. Point is, you got to be able to reset from one play to the next and not just let it snowball like it has at points and times this year.
Yeah, it's those disastrous stretches that have killed this team. And I think what the difference with this team and maybe the last couple of Josh Heupel teams at Tennessee, we watched the last 2 seasons how Tennessee lived on those explosive plays, and they changed the game and they changed the momentum in an instant. And with this offense, they run at a pretty elite clip. Alabama slowed them down there. But you've seen that more often than not this season. They're going to run for 220 plus. What they haven't done consistently or a ton of is those explosive pass plays down the field or just anything consistently in the intermediate passing game. Basically, anytime they are passing, you don't really know what to expect or if it's going to happen or if it's going to be good or bad or in between. And I think with the speed with which this offense wants to move, you can go 3 and out so quickly. So quickly. If you're behind the sticks on first down, you can go 3 and out in 2 seconds and you're punting it back. Just as soon as you gave up a touchdown, you're punting it back and the other team's got the ball. I think that's an issue with this team where they just put together too many 3 and outs. Where once that snowball starts going downhill, man, it gains steam fast, and there's just no way that they can flip it. I mean, you saw at Alabama, they score the 2-play 76-yard drive or whatever to start the second half, and you're thinking Tennessee better get a couple first downs here and slow things down a little bit and kind of get your hands back around this a little bit. And it didn't happen. The whole fair catch thing and 4-yard line. When you can go 3 and out as quickly as this offense can go 3 and out, and you can't consistently make those explosive plays down the field, man, it can be hard to get any momentum back, and it can be hard to slow the other team down.
And I mean, when you're positioned back at your own 4-yard line, I mean, that's tough sledding. I recognize that. I think the biggest thing kind of closing this conversation is somebody's got to step up and make a play. Somebody has got to be the reason that you stop the snowball. One of my favorite movies of all time, and I swear I think I've already said this on GameQuest earlier this year, and if I did, I apologize. The Replacements, man. What's quicksand, Shane Falco? What is it? I mean, one thing happens, then another, then you can't breathe. I mean, something's got to snap, and you got to buck that trend a little bit. And I think the difference in the team last year, one of the many differences, is you had guys that could buck that trend, and so far your quarterback nor anybody else really has shown the ability to do that. Things aren't going to be perfect at Kentucky, okay? You got to find a way to snap that streak and continue on, because this is a more talented team, and you can win this football game, and you need to win this football game, and you need to snap the streak of essentially 4 of your last 5 true road games being losses as well. We will continue to break this down. Who is Kentucky? We'll dive into the nitty-gritty, the stats, who's excelled, who Tennessee has to watch out for, keys to victory, and predictions as we move on. But first, I do want to tell you about our friends. That is over at Prize Picks. PrizePicks.com. I've had so much fun winning 25 times my money back over at PrizePicks.com by putting in that promo code VQ. Because when I put in that promo code VQ, PrizePicks is going to give me an instant deposit match up to $100. It won't go over $100, but if I put in 100, PrizePicks is going to match me 100, 50 to 50, 25 to 25, so on and so forth. And you play, and again, I mentioned 25 times your money back, but here's how it is. You've got projections, right, or totals, and you're going to pick 2 to 6 players, essentially, and they're going to have a projection or a total, and all you're going to do is pick if they're going to go over or under, or in this case, more or less. It's super simple. You have to have at least 2 players, can't go over 6. Make your grid and use that promo code VQ for an instant deposit match, and you can win 25 times your money back over at PrizePicks.com. So, as we do each and every week, Grant Ramey, let's go ahead and make our pick, shall we? If you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see this is what the PrizePicks.com website looks like. Up at the top, all these different sports you can possibly imagine. We're in college football right now. We're in passing yards, and so let's go to the game that matters, Tennessee and Kentucky. Joe Milton, Grant Ramey, The projection from Price Picks, Tennessee, Joe Milton against Kentucky, 232.5 passing yards. Will Joe Milton surpass 232 in the hook, or will he not?
More. Give me more. I like Joe at Alabama. I thought Joe played pretty well at Alabama. I thought he did his part. Made some big throws. Could have used some help with some non-drops, some catches. Give me Joe to. I think running Joe has helped Joe settle in a little bit, so I'm going to go more with Joe on 232.5.
I agree as well, man. And maybe you don't keep up the same pace, but boy, if he had a semblance of what he did in the first half and the second half, I mean, that stat line it was already good. It was great in the first half. It was, of course he got hit, the scoop and score, it wasn't perfect, but that stat line could have been even better. Let's go to his counterpart, Devin Leary, who we're going to talk an awful lot about here in a moment, Grant. Devin Leary, 210 passing yards in the hook, so 210.5. Will he throw for more or less?
I'm going to go less. Like Tennessee's pass rush, and Kentucky's passing offense is pretty pedestrian, one of the lower averages in the league, if I'm not mistaken. So they'll get after him, and they don't throw it great to begin with, so it's not a very good recipe for Kentucky.
So if you look at Devin Leary on the season, he's averaging 196.7 yards per game. So not even averaging 200 yards a game. And we mentioned that pretty less than pedestrian schedule to kick things off. Let's go. So we got our quarterbacks here. Let's go over to the running backs, because I think one of the best matchups in all this football game is Ray Davis against Jalen Wright. Sure, there's going to be Jabari Small in there. There will be some Dylan Sampson, but it's going to be all of Ray Davis for Kentucky. Ray Davis, his total is at 92 in the hook, 92.5 rushing yards. Will he run for more or less than 92.5 against Tennessee?
He'll run for more, because they're going to force the issue with Ray Davis, because we saw what he did against Florida. He ran for 280 and 3 touchdowns. That was the best performance for Kentucky all season. He's going to have to do it again. That's no disrespect to Tennessee's defense. I think they're just going to force it so much with Ray Davis that he's more than 92.5.
Well, I mean, let's be frank too. You can rush for 100 yards and still win this football game. Just don't let him go off. I mean, I thought Jace McClellan, he earned every bit of his 115 yards or whatever that he got the other day. He had that 30-yard scamper there to begin the third quarter. But I thought Tennessee was still pretty good against the run last week, and McClellan kind of earned that. So, and I know Tennessee lost, but you can allow a 100-yard rusher. Just don't let him take over the game. And so I would agree with you. I think he's over. His counterparts, Jalen Wright, disappointing game. It was a disappointing game for all the Tennessee running backs. 54.5 yards. Jalen Wright, more or less?
I think I would take more if that was a first half number. I mean, that seems like a very low number. I think Jalen Wright, it's a get-right game after some frustrations in Tuscaloosa, not only for Jalen, for the rest of Tennessee's running backs, because they're used to running it a lot better at a lot more productive clip than they did in Tuscaloosa. So 54.5 can be way more than that. I think he's way over that.
I would agree with that. I think 54.5 is kind of the low number for him, knowing that, even in Florida, he had a lot more. Gosh, I want to say in Florida, I know Tennessee didn't run the ball well, but Wright still had 60, 70 yards on 16 carries or whatever. So, I mean, Alabama was a disappointment, but I definitely believe that he's going to go over the 54 and a hook. Last one here. Let's have some fun. Squirrel White. 63.5 is the number given. Will Squirrel White go over or under the 63.5? Excuse me. I'm dying here. 2 of the last 3 games, let's mind you, he's had over 10 targets.
It's got to be more, because I took Joe more at 232.5. And if Joe's going over 232.5, Squirrel's got to have at least 63.5, because like you just said, he's going to get a ton of targets. And he's their best big play threat, as we've seen throughout the course of the season.
So, as we are every single week here on GameQuest, we love the overs. Give us more. Joe Milton, 232.5, more. Devin Leary, the only less, 210.5. That is a less. Ray Davis, 92.5 rushing yards, more. Jalen Wright, 54.5 rushing yards, more. And Squirrel White, 63.5 receiving yards. We say more. Looks like Tennessee is going to have a nice little bounce back efforts over there in Lexington, and you can as well if you didn't have the weekend you wanted. Go to PricePicks.com, use that VQ, promo code VQ, and they're going to give you an instant deposit match up to $100. That is PricePicks.com/VQ, for Prize Picks. Hey, welcome back to GameQuest of Volquest.com Game Day Podcast. Appreciate you guys for being here. Appreciate Prize Picks for being a part of the show. I'm Eric Cain, and that is Grant Ramey. Let's go ahead and dive into Kentucky and see what Tennessee's working with. You know, we preview this all week long. We throw out some stats and everything, but let's look at the personnel, and let's start with the guy that makes everything go. We'll get to the quarterback in a moment, but let's talk about Ray Davis a little bit. Grant Ramey, Ray Davis, 111 attempts on the season. He is at 781 yards. That is second most in the SEC. He has 8 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 7 yards per carry. Okay, he had 280 yards against Florida, so keep that in mind. 5 receiving touchdowns, which means with 13 total touchdowns, Ray Davis leads the SEC in total touchdowns. 2 years at Temple, didn't know that earlier in the week. 2 years at Vanderbilt, did know that, knew him at Vanderbilt, and now he's at Kentucky. He is a guy that Tennessee's going to have to stop, and Josh Heupel acknowledged that earlier in the week.
Well, you got to stop them early at the line of scrimmage. But their offensive line, their tight ends, they're extremely physical. They do a really good job getting a hat on a hat. We got to be violent. We got to be disruptive. You got to have gap integrity between all their different personnel groupings, their shifts, their motions. We got to do a great job communicating and being, gapped out. And at the end of the day, when you meet the ball carrier, you got to do a great job of tackling him too. He's extremely physical.
Grant, is it as simple as this? If Tennessee beats or if Tennessee holds Ray Davis in check, he'll get his every now and again, but don't let him take over the game. Does Tennessee win this football game?
What are we talking in check? Give me a range.
I mean, don't let him go for 100. Don't let him go for 120.
Yeah, if you can keep him under 120, I think you're fine. What you just can't do is just let him go off. You can't give him a 280-yard day like he had against Florida and 3 touchdowns or whatever it was. And Tennessee saw Ray Davis last November at Vanderbilt. I just pulled up his box score: 21 rushes, 60 yards, 5 catches, 17 yards. I mean, that's obviously he didn't have a lot of help around him, and that was a very good ball game. And obviously, Kentucky has unlocked something in him that clearly he didn't have at Vanderbilt in terms of help or whatever it is. He's had a great year. I think if you can let him have his to an extent, but if you just can't let him go off. You can't let him kill you. I mean, they're going to force Ray Davis because he's probably the best player they have on their football team, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So, yeah, just let him have his, but not let him kill you.
What's going on with Devin Leary, man? I think he, along with Joe Milton, the lack of consistency with Joe Milton, two of the reasons why the quarterback position's so down in the SEC this year. I mean, I spent all offseason, and people probably got annoyed by me, but it is what it is. I love football, and I like to watch good football players. Devin Leary was one of the best football players in the country in 2021. He was having a pretty decent year last year before the injury. And so I just thought, all right, you get a healthy Devin Leary, you pair him with Liam Cohn, you look at those receivers we'll get to in a moment. Ray Davis is coming to town. I mean, watch out. That offense could be something. Man, Devin Leary has just been so bad this year. So bad. Completing passes at 54%, 14 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Especially compared to how good we've seen him in college football. Boy, he's been disappointing. But I mean, hey, Tennessee's defense can make anybody look good sometimes historically. So obviously you just need to remember what he can do, and they're reminded of that. But so far this year, man, it's been underwhelming.
Yeah, don't be that defense that makes him look like the Devin Leary of old. What the problem has been, I think it's the curse of Rob Lewis, where I just have Will Levis jokes in my head from Rob Lewis all the time. Something about playing quarterback at Kentucky just puts you under a certain spotlight where they haven't performed at least up to expectations or whatever hype is surrounding them going into that season or whatever the case may be. But yeah, don't be that defense. I mean, they're going to have to pressure him like they always do any quarterback. They're going to have to get home on some sacks. They're going to have to change the line of scrimmage. 7 interceptions. You better be opportunistic in the secondary. Tennessee's played pretty well in the secondary until that second half at Alabama, but that was an entire team thing, not just a secondary thing. So don't be that team that makes him look like the guy that Kentucky fans thought they were getting, I guess.
And then you look at the receivers, and they have a pretty good receiver group, but because of the inconsistencies and the lack of production at quarterback, I mean, it's not like any of those guys have gone off this year. I mean, again, the collection of talent, Barry and Brown, Tennessee fans know exactly who that is. 23 receptions, 276 yards, a touchdown. Tavian Robinson, 23 receptions, almost 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. Dane Key, 17 receptions, couple of touchdowns. Those are 3 names that we know. Those are 3 names who've been productive the past year. And there's opportunity there, but again, because of the quarterback play, they haven't really had a chance to shine this season.
No, and it kind of feels like Tennessee, where you've got Squirrel White and you know what he's capable of, and you've seen the plays that he can make. You have Ramel Keaton, you've seen what he's capable of, the plays that he's made the last couple of years, and you're kind of struggling to figure out why it hasn't clicked. And I don't know why that's the case for Kentucky, just like I don't know why that's the case for Tennessee. But once again, you don't want to be that get right opportunity for this Kentucky passing offense, because they're averaging what, 190 we talked about a few minutes ago. That's that's a really low number. So you better keep them there and don't be that defense that lets them go off.
Kentucky will play 2 tight ends. They will employ an H-back. It's going to be playing in a phone booth type game, downhill running, that type of stuff. It's going to be that type of game. So, and that's typically what we can assume from Mark Stoops, the defensive coach, but we can assume that from a Mark Stoops head coach football team, and that's what you're going to get. Offensive line is an area that's improved really, really well this year, Grant. Last year, Kentucky's offensive line, boy, it was let's see here. It was last in the SEC, or next to last in the SEC. I can only assume Vanderbilt was last, and giving up 42 sacks. This year, that number's gone down to 11. In the past 2 weeks, against Georgia, Missouri, that's when I think they've given up a combined 8 sacks. So it's not been trending well of late, but overall, nice bounce back year. 11 sacks allowed, averaging 5.8 yards per carry. Did get a big boost. A guy that starts at right guard. He started at 33 straight games entering the season. In Kenneth Horsey, he played the opener, missed 5 games, and now he is back. So you talk about being opportunistic. I can't say that word. Tennessee's defensive line is going to have those chances, and I think it's a lot of the same. James Pierce off the edge, Tyler Barron off the other, Eason, Thomas, Omar, Norman Lott, those guys in the middle. Just keep doing you, and I think that they can disrupt the passer despite the improved numbers for Kentucky.
Yeah, and I think the big number there is the 8 they've given up over the last 2 games before Kentucky's off last week, but the Missouri and the Georgia games. So if you've only given up, what was the number, 11 all season, or 13,
Yeah.
and now you've given up 8 the last 2 times out, I think that's a big number. And I think this Tennessee defense can go back to being the Tennessee defense that you saw a lot of in the first half against Alabama. You saw it all 60 minutes against A&M a couple of weeks ago. Go back to being that defense that can get off the field on third down, that can pressure quarterback, that can get to the quarterback, that can get Kentucky behind the sticks, and kind of go from there. Let James Pierce be James Pierce, and let all those other guys that you just mentioned have their moments, because it feels like everybody's kind of having their moments for the Tennessee defense, at least on the front.
2023 offense, 31 points per game, 352 yards of total. I would imagine that is middle of the pack to back of the pack in terms of total yardage. 31 points per game is not bad, but I would assume it's still probably 5th or 6th in the SEC. But that 352 yards of total, that's a low number. 196 through the air, as we mentioned, 155 on the ground. How much of that 155 is inflated by that 280-yard performance from Ray Davis against Florida? I'm sure it is a little bit, but he's got, I think, 2 other 100-yard games on the season. 10 turnovers, and I mentioned the 11 sacks. Now let's shift the gears to defense. Kentucky's defense overall last year, despite only registering 19 sacks a season ago, it was the 3rd best defense in the conference, right behind Georgia and Alabama last year. It slipped a little bit in points per game. It's allowing 27 points per game so far this season. But the 346 yards of total defense, not a bad number. It has been pretty suspect through the air. 251 yards allowed through the air so far on average. 95 against the run on average. So again, you've gone from an A&M group that allowed, I want to say, 84 on the ground, to Alabama that allowed 104 on the ground, now to Kentucky that allows 95 on the ground. I mean, this is welcome to the SEC, right? But I do think that number is a little bit different because, again, you played Missouri and Georgia the last 2 weeks, but before that, you didn't play a whole lot of teams that could run the football efficiently. So we'll see what Jalen Wright and company can do. 16 sacks on the year. So I mentioned 19 sacks last year, already 16 sacks, 7 interceptions, and 4 recovered fumbles. Excuse me. Essentially, in the 4-2-5 multiple scheme, J.J. Weaver's a guy off the edge that we've heard of, that we've seen play for a couple years. Octavius Oxnine, if you follow Tennessee recruiting, you remember that name. How can you forget it? He's a veteran that started on that defensive line for years and years and years. De'Eric Jackson and Trevin Wallace are the two inside backers, and they're productive players. But, man, there's a quarterback, Grant. He's a young guy. His name is Maxwell Harrison. He ties for the lead on the team with 44 tackles. He's got 5 interceptions at cornerback. He's leading the team in tackles, and he's got 5 picks on one side. And you talk about that guy that's made the most of his opportunities. You got to watch out. You got to find where Maxwell Harrison is, and I would just say don't throw it his way.
Yeah, and I think, just kind of ignoring the pass game altogether, I think the Tennessee run game's going to get back to being the Tennessee run game that we're used to seeing, that we saw go off against a really good A&M defense that didn't really show up all that much against Alabama, at least not up the middle, at least not these running backs getting what they usually get. I think this Tennessee run game should be trying to make a statement against Kentucky that they can get back to being the team that they are, that can rush for 230 like it's just any other game. Obviously, with those numbers that Kentucky's given up, that's a pretty good defense you're facing. Keep Joe running the football 15 times if you can. That option still looks good with him, the way he reads it. Keep doing that. Keep helping him settle into the game through the run, and then set up the pass. And just avoid the catastrophic mistakes. They're going to create turnovers. It seems like they've created them all season. You can't give them a ton. If you lose the turnover battle on the road, that's a bad recipe, especially when you have an offense that can struggle at times to stay on the field in the quick 3 and outs that we talked about earlier in the show. So take care of the football, run the football, and go from there.
We don't typically go over special teams. I know Rob does the special teams section in the matchup piece, but here on GameQuest, we don't typically do that. But I wanted to this week because Barry Brown, a name that again we all know, very dynamic returner, punt returner. He's returned 3 punts this year. He's had 1 long of 36 yards. As a kick returner, he's already had 199-yard return for a touchdown. You're gonna have to be really good with your coverage. You have to stay in your lane. Don't get washed down. And then you got a kicker that's made all 6 of his field goals, and you got a punter that's downed 7 punts inside the 20 and had 6 punts of 50-plus yards. They're pretty sound special teams-wise, and you got to corral Barry Brown. Do not let him, have a play that could ignite something for Kentucky in the home crowd.
And it feels like Tennessee's been pretty good in coverage on special teams this year. Most kickoffs are going out of the back of the end zone. Jackson Ross has turned out to be one of the better punters in college football, in my opinion. The biggest thing for Tennessee, you got to keep your hands down. No pointing at the sky on kickoff team. No, whatever. What was it, like this? Maybe right above the shoulder, something like that.
Maybe just an inch or something. Not to go into that, but it's pretty obvious, right? He did it early in the game. Somebody saw it. Somebody told the official, and they were looking for it. Because how in the world? I said this earlier in the week, like on one of my podcasts, like how in the world could you see that if you weren't looking for it?
Right.
And so if an analyst or an assistant coach for Alabama saw that earlier in the game, they're like, wait a minute, technically we can get a penalty out of that. Let me go tell the official. The official was looking for it, and boom. It's weak. It might have been an inch or two above the shoulder, but as Josh Heupel said on Monday, you wrote about it. I said it on the message board, and people did not like it. Letter of the law, you can't do it.
And classic college football officiating, it wasn't even the worst fair catch issue of the weekend.
Yeah.
It was the Iowa kid that was waving to the left below his shoulder, who returned a kick with 90 seconds left that would have won the game, and they call it back because he's waving his arm to his side. I don't know what. That's not a fair catch signal. That's classic college football officiating. That's the Tennessee issue is not even the biggest issue specifically with that call on that weekend. I think with Tennessee, though, just match special teams, basically. D. Brown's capable of getting loose on a punt return or a kickoff return if you ever get a kickoff return opportunity, just like...
That'd be D. Williams to you, sir.
What did I just say?
D. Brown.
Oh, yeah, Barry Brown, D. Williams. Okay, there we go.
I see. That'd be a dynamic returner. I see what you did.
I would. You mash them together. It's dynamic. They're dynamic on their own, but I think if D. Williams can match Barry and Brown, it's a wash and they're fine. But I would be all in on a crazy special teams game.
Heck yeah, that'd be fun. That would be fun. All right, you've already kind of gone a little bit into it. Give me a couple of keys, and then I'll give some keys. We'll get in our prediction. Couple of keys for Tennessee. What do you got?
I got to run the football. Got to protect the football. Don't turn it over. Win the turnover battle and run it the way they've shown they can consistently run it. And that's a pretty good recipe on the road to win a game, to stay in a game, to not have those disastrous stretches that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, get back to being who you are. You got to be yourself, and when you are being you out there, you're running the football and doing it at an efficient clip. Get Jay Wright back to what he was doing, Jabari Small, Dylan Sampson. If they're back to what they're doing in that regard, maybe you don't need to call as many design runs for Joe Milton, but I still like that. I still think that adds something. I still think it looks good. And, we'll just let Joe kind of do his thing. I mean, if he can carry some things over from last week, I think that'd be great. I'm not saying he's turned any corner. We need to see some consistency, but a lot of last week from Joe Milton was good. And if he can carry that on throughout the rest of the season, boy, that can be exciting. Defensively, just gap integrity, run lanes. I think the defensive backfield, the safeties. This is a Jalen McCullough game. Now, that's a bold prediction. This is a Jalen McCullough game. Coming downhill, run fits, helping out, tackling Ray Davis, okay? Watch for Wesley Walker and Jalen McCullough to have a big impact in this game. So, gap integrity, corral Ray Davis, and make things difficult for Devin Leary. A lot of these keys are the same keys every single week. Give me a score prediction and a bold prediction, Grant Ramey.
Bold prediction. I'm going to start there because I haven't even thought of a score prediction. I'm going back to my magic number, 232 rushing, because we almost had it against South Carolina, if not for that last. How ironic it was a fourth down conversion where they ran for 6 on a 4th and 3 to get to 238, and then they had 232 a week later against A&M. So I'm going back to the well on 232 rushing. I'm going to go Joe Milton 4 total touchdowns. I don't know if that's what the split is, rushing, passing. I'm going to go 4 total touchdowns, though. Score prediction, I'm going to go Tennessee 31, Kentucky 21.
Yeah, I haven't really given much thought to the score prediction, as well as our weekly listeners here at GameQuest know. We record this before we put the score prediction piece out there on Fridays. I'll start on defense. I think Tennessee's going to win the turnover battle 3-1. There'll be a turnover somewhere. It just happens. It's football. But I think Tennessee's going to create 3, and so you'll win the turnover battle 3-1. I think Jalen McCullough, as I mentioned, I'm gonna stay with that. I think Jalen McCullough is going to be I don't want to say leading tackler, but I want to say he gets about 7 to 8 tackles, and from the safety position, that's not necessarily what you want. But in a game like this, I think it's good. So give me Jalen McCullough 7-8 tackles. That's not too bold. Let's continue getting bolder here. I like the Joe Milton 4 total touchdowns. I was actually going to say that, so I'll say 5. Give me Joe Milton 5 total touchdowns. That's pretty freaking bold. Man, if they could just figure out the quarterback sneak on the goal line, man, that's it. I mean, Peyton Manning could do it. Can't Joe Milton? I mean, come on.
Yep.
Yeah. So give me Joe Milton 5 total touchdowns, and I think Tennessee wins this game comfortably. I really do. I like this matchup. If Tennessee jumps up a couple scores, I don't want to say it's over for Kentucky, but Kentucky's not built to come back, and Alabama is not built to come back as much as they've been in years past. But they still have good players, and you saw that last week. Kentucky's not built to come back, in my opinion. So, and I don't think Florida's built to come back, but Tennessee never got that lead, against Florida. So, I like this matchup so much. So I'll go win the turnover battle 3-1. Jalen McCullough, give me 8 tackles. Joe Milton, give me 5 total touchdowns. These are all pretty bold here. And score prediction, what'd you say, 31-21?
I said 31-21, yeah.
Give me 35-21. I think Tennessee wins this one by at least 2 scores. So, and if that happens, Grant, Tennessee improves to 6-2, 3-2, and you come back home, you'll be 7-2, and then when you go on the road to Missouri, you'll be 7-2, a chance to come back home 8-2. Again, so much to play for, with a couple of games left here.
My thing last week was I needed to see them perform on the road in a hostile environment, and they performed way outside of my expectations for the first half. They just got to put 60 minutes together for 4 full quarters of football, and I think it's because of this series and the way it's gone historically. I think sometimes that can matter, and I think this is a game Tennessee can win. They could lose it too, but they can win. They should win, and I think they should cover. I've seen enough on the road to think they can play well on the road.
I agree. I would agree with that as we kind of say goodbye here on GameQuest.com or Volquest.com, GameQuest podcast. All coverage, continued coverage leading up to kickoff. during the game. The game thread is something else, that is for sure. Come be a part of it. Come hang out with us. We'll have plenty of reaction and on into the night, all day Sunday. No better place to be informed, prepared, place to react, place to talk with your friends than over at Volquest.com. We got breaking news, guys, 10 months ago in terms of Michigan Spygate here. I mean, we got it all at Volquest. Shout out, was it Arnie Palmer? Is that it?
Yeah. Something involving Arnold Palmer. Yeah.
Hey.
It was a big week. It was a big week for him.
Shout out to you. You deserve all the national celebrity success you're getting on all these shows throughout the week. Job well done. You're the GOAT. And yeah, you can find people like that here at Volquest.com. Tennessee and Kentucky, 7 o'clock, ESPN, Saturday nights. And really appreciate you guys for being here on GameQuest. Get ready for it, and we'll talk to you after the game.